Good morning to you. Good morning to you. Good morning, won't you share with a friend or two? Good morning to you. Well, I hope everybody is having a great and wonderful day. Welcome to Daring Dialogues. I am your host, Shantae Charles, and it is Teachable Tuesday. It is Teachable Tuesday. My. Did I get schooled over the weekend? Yeah. Let's see. 48 hours. 48 hours, I felt like I was in speeded up family heritage, revelatory, cram it all in your brain time. And I know I still have so much more to learn. So I want to say good morning to each and every one of you. Good morning. Welcome to Daring Dialogues. I am your host, Shantae Charles. I have a lot to share, but I do know that I can't cram it all into one session. So I'm going to sort of give it to you in bite-sized pieces. And I'm going to come back probably later this week and do a couple of more pieces within the broadcast time. So you'll just have to tune in. All right. So today is Teachable Tuesday. And I learned a lot. We are going to do some reading today out of our books, The Color of Compromise by Jamar Tisby, Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi. We're not going to do as much reading as we normally would because I have some things I want to talk about. Spare the Kids, Why Whooping Children Won't Save Black America. I think probably this is the most important book to make sure that we read from today, so I'm going to start here. And let's talk. So, if you want to know what I was doing in detail over the weekend, you can go to my Periscope because I do have some videos up on Periscope. And so you can meet one of my relatives who I met for the first time at my grandmother's funeral. He was one of my grandmother's sons that she gave up for adoption. And I got a chance to spend some time with him this weekend and learn his piece of the family history and things that he knew about my family history. And he got a chance to learn some things about his sister, my mother, and our growing up and things that he didn't know because he was not with them and with us as we grew up. So it was really a great time of bonding. It was a time of catching up. It was a time of learning more about family history from each other. So it was a wonderful time, wonderful learning experience. Many of my relatives are very colorful in their language. So if you are listening to some of my videos on Periscope, some of the last 3 or 4, you will probably notice that. So I wasn't there to police anyone's language, but yeah, you'll hear lots of sprinkled in language that I don't use personally, but again, I was in the company of people who do. So I just wanted to put that caveat there. Also, on Periscope, if you go and check out those videos, you will get an opportunity to see me walking some grounds that are very important to my family. One of the things that it made me think about was the scale and the magnitude of 40 acres. I don't think a lot of people understand the magnitude of 40 acres. But I got a chance to understand the magnitude of that this past weekend, and the not just the magnitude of it, but the physical responsibility, I'll put it that way, the physical responsibility of stewarding 40 acres of land. It's a responsibility. And as much as people say, give me my 40 acres and a mule, I'm going to need you to actually go and walk 40 acres and see if you still want those 40 acres and a mule, or if you want the monetary equivalent of 40 acres and a mule. So that's my little caveat for that. Again, that is on Periscope. You can go check that out on Periscope later today. But one of the most interesting things, I got a chance to, at the same time I was going to visit my family, one of my great aunts who I had never met, my grandmother's sister, was also on her way there. And I actually got a chance to meet my grandmother's sister that I had never met. Beautiful. And she happens to live in Maryland. And so I look forward to continuing our getting to know each other while she is here in Maryland living. And also I got a chance to meet my other uncle that I had never met because he was given away for adoption. I also got a chance to meet him. And so again, just when God tells you to do something, or when he says, change your schedule, shift your schedule, I need you to go do this, listen to the Lord, all right? Listen to the Lord. And so because I changed my schedule, shifted my schedule as the Lord was telling me to do, I got a chance to meet some other pieces of my family puzzle that I had never met. And one of them just happened to be there from Maryland at the same time. So I was able to meet up with my two great aunts and two of my uncles. And again, out of those four, two of them I had never met before. So it was a opportune time. It was a Kairos moment for me, because you don't realize sometimes that when you are meeting the other parts of your family, things about yourself and your characteristics and your personality start to make sense. You start to realize that there are a lot more genetic connections than you actually realize. Like, lots of people in my family are very musical. My great aunts were all educators. I didn't know that. They spent their career in education, some in elementary school, some in higher education. And one of my great aunts was a librarian. So all of these different pieces, so I'm starting to understand more about my family genetics. And you don't have to do that through a DNA test, although I'm about to get to that next. So as I was having these conversations with my family members and trying to find out some things about my great-grandparents and how we managed to keep our land in North Carolina in a time and territory where all of the surrounding land is owned by white families, and where the Ku Klux Klan made regular rounds in the area, terrorizing Black people, murdering Black people, and taking their land. And so I got some more understanding about that, and how our family maintained keeping our land for, I think she said now it's been in our family for around 80 years. And just getting the history on that and trying to figure out how we were able to keep land in our family was fascinating. Again, I can't get into all of it here, and I certainly won't get into all of it here because some people are unfortunately too nosy. So I won't get into it on Facebook Live. It's I have Facebook Live going and Periscope going. Periscope is pretty good, but Facebook, I don't know. We're still working with the Facebook crowd. So the point I'm making, I know I'm being rather long-winded today, but the point I'm making is it is important to meet your family. It is important to have conversations about your family history. It is important to lay aside, how can I put it, disgruntledness, family issues, things that are under the bridge, disagreements that might have occurred with people who are now dead and gone. It is time to, in many of our lives, write new chapters in your family's history. And the only way that you can do that is to really go back and start having the conversations, the necessary conversations with your elders, so that you can begin to chart a proper understanding of your history so that you know where you're going for the future. And I will say that to anyone. I learned a lot about how my family was able to maintain the land. I also learned how my family acquired the land. I also learned through my uncle, who chose to do ancestry DNA testing. Because he chose to do that test, he actually got results pretty much for all of us, because they gave him the matrilineal DNA test results, which means his mother, which would have been my grandmother, he got those results of her DNA. And let me just tell you, I was pretty shocked. I was not as shocked as I thought I was going to be, because there were some things that I already knew based on what the Lord told me, and based on what my grandmother had told me, and based on what some other researchers told me, who came up to me and started asking me all these questions, because I have a mark of something that they were saying comes from a specific country. And so I'm going to go over that with you all first, and then we're going to get into our reading. All right. So because he actually did the DNA testing, I don't have to. Somebody say hallelujah. Because I told the Lord, I'm not giving nobody my DNA for no test. And so and it's funny, I said, if you want me to have these DNA results, you're going to have to use somebody else, because I'm not doing it. And lo and behold, he used somebody else in my family. Matter of fact, somebody who has a closer matrilineal DNA connection. So he got basically his mother, or my grandmother's, matrilineal results. So I'm going to talk about these results because they confirm some things for me. So let me talk about the first part of this. And as you can see, this is the DNA test. All right. Just so you know, I'm not just talking off the top of my head. So he allowed me to take pictures of the results. Turns out I have, let me see, 19, 7 is 26, 26, 27, 28, 29. So according to this test, all right, I am about 29% white folks. 29%. Now that didn't surprise me because of some of the things I already know about my heritage. 29% though, 29%. So that means 71% of me, or actually 29% and 68% of me is African, and 3% of me is Native American. Now, I was actually surprised by how little Native American I had. But that was explained to me because more than likely my great-grandmother was mulatto, which would also explain why I have 29% white folks. Which would also explain why I'm always on white folks' case. So I'm gonna read off these percentages and tell you about my African lineage. Okay, my African lineage. Y'all laughing? I'm not laughing. Now this just gave me more ammunition because y'all is 29% of me. I'm gonna need y'all to get it all the way together. Okay, all the way, all the way. So, the highest percentage of African I have in me is Benin, Togo. Benin, Togo. I wasn't really surprised by that. I have 19% England, Wales, Northwestern Europe. I was not surprised by that. I have 17% Cameroonian, Congo, and Southern Bantu peoples. I was not surprised by that because the Southern Bantu peoples are where so my voice should increase amongst them. Exactly, Pastor. I have 17% Congo and Southern Bantu people. And Southern Bantu people, in case you didn't know, are Hebrew. So I wasn't surprised by that. I have 13% Ivory Coast, Ghana. I wasn't surprised by that because, but I probably have more than that if I combine both sides of my own DNA, because my grandmother on my father's side used to tell me that we came from Ghana all the time. So I was not surprised by that result. So yeah, Ghana, Hebrew, Southern Bantu, Hebrew. 10% Mali. I was like, oh yeah, this is great. Mansa Musa, education, librarians. Yeah, that makes sense. So I wasn't surprised by that. 7% Ireland and Scotland. I also was not surprised by that. I was surprised by 4% Nigerian. I was surprised by that. Nigerians, some of them don't care too much for me. I'm making jokes over here, but it's true. So yeah, I was a little surprised by that. Again, I said Native American, 3%, Senegal, 2. And this other small 3% is the part that I wanted to find out more about, because I've had 2 times in my life where someone has come up to me and said, do you know that you are descended from Swedish royalty? And I was like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. And they were like, yeah. And this was at 2 different separate times of my life. And it was 2 different people that were both doing similar research, and their research had to do with birthmarks. And they were saying that my birthmark on my neck, which actually is in the shape of Sweden, by the way, they said that this is a birthmark of Swedish royalty, that it has something to do with being descended from Swedish kings. So in this DNA ancestry test, we have 1% Norway, 1% Germanic Europe, and 1% Sweden. So I was not surprised by the Swedish part, but I was kind of surprised because it actually shows up in our DNA testing. So in my research, because of two different people at two different times in my life telling me that, I started doing some research on Sweden and Swedish kings and whether or not they had any connection to this side of the United States. Because I'm like, if that is true, then somebody from that area, somebody from Sweden, would have made a connection over in the area where my family was from. And so here it talks about the ethnicity, and it goes into telling you about the community of the United States. And so my family, it says, early North Carolina African Americans from your regions, England, Wales, Northwestern Europe, Benin, Togo. And then it says South Carolina African Americans from your regions, Benin, Togo, Cameroon, Congo, and Senegal. Then it goes back into, so my family originally came through South Carolina, which means they would have came through that slave port and made their way to North Carolina. And then it has the Carolinas eastern border African Americans, and then Southeast North Carolina African Americans. So as I began to do my study, this was years ago, I found out that there is some history about the Swedes having contact with native populations off of this area in North Carolina. So historically, that actually lines up. And so, yeah, this actually, again, gives me much more ammunition to talk to my fellow white brethren, of whom makes up 29% of my DNA. This gives me more ammunition. That's all it did for me. Again, it confirmed some things about being of Hebrew origin and not just African origin. And it also confirmed, like I said, for me, that, yeah, I do have some Swedish descent in me, but I don't know if I want to trace it any further. And it also, like I said, confirmed the Irish-Scottish piece. So, yeah. If you can find a way to get your DNA results from your family member, from somebody else doing the test, because I was like, I'm not giving away my DNA. Sorry, just not here. I'm not here for that. But anyway, I have several friends who are Ghanaian who have said that I look just like people from Ghana. So they will be excited to hear that, yes, my bloodline is Ivory Coast, Ghana, Benin, Togo, and yeah. So within 48 hours, as I was saying, within 48 hours, God was just answering all of these different questions that I have had and been doing studies on about my own self and my own lineage for years. 4 years. That's the power of obeying God when he tells you to get your happy self up, pack your bags, and go somewhere. All right? So I want to encourage people. That was just in 48 hours. Now I probably will have to do some more digging, like I said, if I want more information. But that was just in 48 hours. I got decades of questions, decades of questions answered in 48 hours. Yeah. Pretty amazing for me. Also, I got an opportunity to visit and meet for the first time in person Lady Barbara, who is on here this morning. Good morning, Lady Barbara. So I got a chance to visit one of the We Dare squads and Life Nation partners who's in another state. I do look forward to doing that some more in the future, visiting some of you who are direct supporters of what we do here. So yeah, it was fantastic. It was wonderful. And I encourage people to seek out your family, seek out your relatives, make contact with them. It is really time for lots of reunions to happen. And it doesn't have to be a quote unquote family reunion setting. Sometimes it's just you need to go and talk with people, meet with people you never met in your family, have conversations. You can start learning things about your family history that you just did not know. And so just like with the Native American piece, it is said that my great-grandfather is Blackfoot and Guyanese. And my great-grandmother was more than likely mulatto. So our DNA actually shows that she was more than likely mulatto and not Native American. So I got some more things answered about my heritage. So again, I encourage people, get the questions answered. Don't just have it swirling around in your head, wondering about your family members. If they're alive, go find them if you can. If they're alive and you know where they are, go find them. Go talk with them. Go have necessary conversations, because it will provide a fullness to what you already know about yourself. All right. Spare the kids. Why whooping children won't save Black America. We have been talking about the notion of the Black Queen, or the mother that many times might be abusive and has not been called into account. So that's what we're talking about here. We started talking about rap music and African American men, and how they many times rap about violence against women. And some of the writers and researchers were talking about how when you start digging into what they're rapping about, there's usually some form of abuse that has happened. Good morning, Jessica Richardson. Good morning, Lady Latoya. It's starting to show me your comments now. Good morning, Lady Barbara. Good morning, Deacon Henry. Good morning, Pastor Ben. Good morning for each and every one of you who has been on. So it's talking now about the fact that these rappers who have been rapping all of these things about violence and degrading women, and in particular Black women, that some of that is stemming from their own childhood abuses and experiences with their mothers. So that's where we're going to pick up our reading today. We're not going to read a whole lot, but we are going to go into a couple of more stories from men talking about their abuse at home. Lady Jessica, we try to be inspirational. This next section might not be too inspirational, but it is necessary because it's a necessary conversation we need to be having in the Black community. Curry is clear that for those committed to understanding early childhood abuse and its relationship to intimate partner violence in adulthood, we have to begin admitting that sometimes the cycles of violence, which so often are manifested as domestic violence against women, begin with the trauma and pain associated with the childhood violence and neglect, which are far too often committed by mothers. Given the historic disparaging of Black mothers, whether Daniel Patrick Moynihan's domineering unwed mother stereotype, or Ronald Reagan's welfare queen stereotype, or the crack mother stereotype, it is no wonder that there is a level of defensiveness when talking about this topic. Yet, Black fathers are also demonized and critiqued. Somehow, it's okay to talk about the many ways that Black fathers have failed their women and abandoned their children, but calling out black mothers for beating their children is problematic, and few people are willing to do it. But if, as experts say, men generally base the way they treat women on their relationship with their mothers, and if physical violence is associated with family dynamics from an early age, we need to consider the link between whoopings and adult domestic abuse, violence, and misogynistic behaviors, whether it be physical, emotional, mental, or any combination thereof. Simply put, if a boy growing up is hit by a parent who is supposed to love and protect him, that boy is at risk of being confused about who to respect and about what love is supposed to feel like, because the person he loves the most is hurting him. The same is true of girls who are hit by their fathers. But for once, can we please center the needs of black boys all by themselves for this topic? It is not far-fetched to assert that a boy who is hit or verbally abused by his mother might grow up not respecting her and may very well end up beating women or engaging in other forms of violence. Mass incarceration, systemic poverty, and the divestment from black communities have been anti-family, splitting apart parents and children to the point where the majority of black children are growing up in homes where many black fathers are involved in their lives but are not living in the house. To fill that vacancy, some of their mothers, who are constantly advised that they can't effectively raise sons without men in their household, feel compelled to emulate or perform masculinity by using physical punishment as a form of tough love and as a deterrent for delinquent behavior. In other words, we use a negative to prevent further negatives, as if that makes sense. And some mothers bring in father figures to give their children what they think they are missing. So a stepfather, an uncle, or an older brother, or even a neighbor might be brought in to whip a child. It is important to acknowledge that the violence does not need to be perpetuated or perpetrated directly by a woman to have the same result. I'm not implying that black men's misogyny or violence in black communities begins or ends with black mothers, and I'm not holding black motherhood responsible for all of the ills plaguing our communities. However, we are accustomed to hearing conversations about black men as absent fathers, as sexist, as violent perpetrators, and about how some seem to avoid having relationships with black women. But we rarely seek context for how this is happening. Black men are not born innately sexist or violent. As with their brothers of other races and ethnic backgrounds, that is socialized behavior. And in the overwhelming number of cases, their mothers have become the primary socializer into that behavior. Knowing that all problematic behaviors can be traced to an individual's backstory made me want to explore the potential link between childhood whoopings of black boys and their mothers and their negative attitudes and treatments of black women into adulthood. Consider the following stories of black men who told me that they grew up seeing other black children around them being beaten, and like Gordon at the beginning of this chapter, thought it was the norm. Most shared that being whooped as children left them with conflicting feelings towards their mothers, doubts about whether they were truly loved, feelings of inner rage, and questions about their own sense of self-worth. Some of them admitted that their mothers' beatings made them turn away from black women as intimate partners. Because there are a lot of people who have a problem with black men looking outside of their community for partners, but nobody's talking about this part of it. I'm gonna just let y'all think on that. Yeah. Some of them admitted that their mother's beatings made them turn away from black women as intimate partners. Brian Kevin Alsop, a 22-year-old valet from Baltimore, said his mother was verbally abusive and started beating him when he was 2 or 3 years old using her fists, a packet of clothes hangers, a plastic t-ball bat, and other objects. She would use mostly her fists or whatever was around that could hurt me, but not possibly kill me. Some stuff she took out on me because I was there. She's thrown a glass bottle at me. She picked up a dining room chair and was about to hit me with it, but I screamed and she put it down. His mother used verbal and physical abuse simultaneously. She would tell me I wasn't that word. She called me the B word. She called me a mother effer. She called me a fat pig. She called me stupid. That I was a F up, he said. A lot of stuff that I spent a good part of my childhood suppressing and trying to forget. Wanting to hit her back was always going through my mind. Feeling like I hated her, which I told her while she was on top of me beating me one day. Feeling like I just wanted to die. Marvin Murray, a 51-year-old network administrator from Lake Ridge, Virginia, was beat by his mother until he turned 16. She used her hands, switches from a tree branch, belts, extension cords, and a fan belt from a car engine. LaTroy Graham, a 38-year-old telecommunications engineer from Staten Island, New York, said his mother beat him with belts and extension cords. One time she made me take a bath and beat me with the extension cord while I was still wet. CM, a 42-year-old teacher from California who asked that his full name not be used, said he's blocked out a lot of the whoopings he got from his bad-tempered mother who was molested by one of her own mother's boyfriends. Whenever I did something wrong, I got whooped for it. It could have been something as small as not doing the dishes or not finishing homework to being defiant at school. I rarely did anything half as bad as my peers. I never shoplifted. I never joined a gang. I never tagged or did graffiti. I never had a run-in with the law. None of that. CM's mother used anything and everything as a weapon. Peanut butter jars, plates, extension cords, belts, even a machete. Nothing was out of her scope. I will never forget the machete she had confiscated from a drunk neighbor. She hit me with it on the flat side. She didn't hit me hard, but she hit me with it at least 3 times. I literally thought I was going to die. I couldn't have been more than 11 years old. Later, as I got older, my mom claimed she didn't remember that day, like I was lying. During many of his whoopings, CM wished his mother dead. I remember praying to white Jesus that Bruce Lee would come back from the dead and beat her. Every day, I would wish for something bad to happen to my mother. Charles Sinkay Fullwood, a 65-year-old writer and media consultant from Silver Spring, Maryland, was around 4 years old the first time his mother whooped him. He was standing on the back steps of his house with his dog. When the dog turned abruptly and knocked him off the steps, he lay on his back and cried. My mother came outside from the kitchen, singing her spirituals and talking to herself, and proceeded to whoop me for what seemed to have been an eternity, Fullwood recalled. I distinctly remember for the first time asking why she was beating me when I had not done anything. "In case you do something when I'm not around to see you," she shouted. There was almost a chuckle of triumph in her voice. Fullwood's mother mostly whooped them with switches. Sometimes she would wait until bedtime for maximum effect. Other times she would administer the assault on the scene of whatever the real or perceived violation. But if my being bad happened at church or around company, she would say, "Wait until you get home." Timothy Mcnair, a 27-year-old freelance writer from Chicago, started getting whooped by his mother when he was 8, at least 2 times a week, he recalled. I remember them being very explosive and full of hate. My mother would do such things as loom over my bed with a fire iron in her hand as I slept at night in our trailer. She would wake me up in order me to go urinate, or she would bust my brains out if I wet the bed. I already had a major fear of the dark because of sexual abuse, and I had a urinary problem until I was 12. Mcnair said his mother had a penchant for instilling terror in him and embarrassing him in public. If we were at a barber shop, she would bring a switch into the facility with her because I was not to show my butt by crying if the barber's clippers made me feel uncomfortable. She and the barbers would comment on me needing to not be a punk, Southern black pejorative for gay. They'd laugh as she'd switch me in public and use me as a public shaming example, a lot like what parents are now doing on YouTube. That I wish they would stop doing, because that's out there in cyberspace for a long time, like kind of forever. The first time 28-year-old Anthony Modesto Millian remembers being hit was at age 8. She busted my lip open, he said. His mom died when he was 13, and then an aunt took him in and resumed the beatings. My aunt would hit me almost every day. My aunt would use anything she could grab. Once she hit me with a metal pipe, and another time she lacerated my head with a can of Glory mustard greens. She then kicked me out of the house and made me walk to school with my head open and blood pouring down my face. Keith Mcnair, a 40-year-old reservations manager for Alcoholics Anonymous, was popped, also known as beaten with belts, switches, shoes, or a broom anytime he gave his mother attitude. She often laced her comments with profanity. I usually experienced the full gamut of emotions, including fear, stress, guilt, and anger. I certainly felt that being whipped was normal and that I brought it upon myself. I felt like she hated me. She would be so intense and so angry that I felt that I was receiving someone else's punishment. In my mind, I remember wondering what I possibly could have done to deserve such treatment. Rarely a day went by when Mcnair's mother wasn't cursing at him. She would call me fat or sissy or punk or mama's boy. Among the list of nonverbal weapons that 34-year-old Roy Brooks' mother either used or threatened were with a hanger, an extension cord, and a water hose. My mother cursed at me. She used typical curse words, effer, mother effer, a-hole, he recalled. Many things went through my mind depending on why I was getting a beating. Sometimes I was just mentally preparing myself to take it, but sometimes I would think, I can't wait until I grow up so I can leave and never come back. Or, I hate this woman. As I got older, thoughts like, I hate this woman turned into, I effing hate this stupid bee. She beats me and curses me out for stuff, even when I'm right. She lets these men that she dates lie to her face and get away with anything. Anthony Jones, a 58-year-old electrical mechanic from Pasadena, California, was around 5 years old when his mother started beating him with belts, electric cords, and switches. During the beatings, he said 2 thoughts went through his mind. I'm never going to do that again, and when is this going to stop? My mother whooped me every time I did something that she thought was serious enough. She often bragged about it to family members, said 38-year-old Ramon Billingsley, a PhD student and a minister from Birmingham, Alabama. His mother continued beating and threatening him up to his senior year in high school. If she did not hit me, then she would threaten to do it in an effort to make me comply with her instructions. Her belief was, spare the rod, spoil the child. When I asked Billingsley and the others if they had ever hit women, most of them said no. I knew that hitting women was wrong. Their mothers taught them that it was wrong to hit girls and women, even as they themselves were abusing their sons. As a result, most of these men say they suppressed their anger for decades. Others say they released their pent-up rage, but at other women in their lives, never their mothers. This is not surprising given the research that suggests that abused boys often embrace behaviors and attitudes associated with domestic violence as adults. Nicholas Gaines, a 30-year-old from Salt Lake City, thought that being hit was a normal black thing. I know that was a lot. I know that was pretty intense. We're going to come back to what happened to these men in their later life as they continue to share. But this whole notion that black children have to be beat to be put in their place, is an extension of slavery. And the sooner we understand that, the sooner we can start undoing the damage that we're doing to the future generation. I encourage every parent, if you are a parent, to get this book and read it before you lay hands on your children one more time. get this book and call a moratorium on hitting your children. And take the time to read this book. And then after you're done reading, if you still want to hit your children, I would actually be shocked if you still wanted to. But that's my challenge for parents. Read this book, and while you're reading it, agree that while you're reading this book, you are no longer going to hit them. No hitting, no belts, no extension cords, or any other thing, no switches, none of that. Just tell your children you're going to take a moratorium on hitting them, and you're going to read this book. And after you're done, if you still think that beating your child, physically beating your child makes sense, then I will say at least you have the information now. But I don't see how you can read this and still think that you're actually doing a service to your children by doing that. But that's my challenge, all right? Email me, readshante@gmail.com. Let me know if you're going to participate in that challenge. Let me know. We're going to move on to chapter 2 in the book, The Color of Compromise, the truth about the American church's complicity in racism. Today, I want to encourage you to make sure you take some time to pray for the many families that are continuing to be affected by the several shootings. I believe one just happened again today. By the several shootings that have gone on in the past few days, of more people just pulling out guns and shooting people randomly in various places. I think the last one was this morning at a Walmart store. There was another one over the weekend at a garlic festival. Another one before that. I don't remember the location. But now it seems as if they're happening, more and more frequently. So I want to encourage you, pray for those families. Pray for the families of those who are affected by the deaths of their loved ones at the hands of gun violence. Please pray. Also, get on the phone and call your local legislative bodies and begin ringing their phone, because something does need to be done. And guess what? We have people in place who can get it done, but they won't get it done unless there is public pressure to get something done in terms of gun laws. Chapter 2, Making Race in the Colonial Era. We're going to begin this chapter, and we'll stop. We'll take a break in this book. We're not going to get to stamp from the beginning today, but that's okay. We'll take a break, and then if you want to join us, I'm going to leave the link up here once we get done. If you want to join us on Periscope for our audience response, you can join us there. Making Race in the Colonial Era. The Colonial Museum in Williamsburg, Virginia, features exhibits detailing the earliest English settlements in North America. Plaques that explain the conditions for Africans in colonial Virginia hang on the walls. One display explains the process by which those Africans became slaves for life. The headline reads, Key Slavery Statutes of the Virginia General Assembly. So when people are always asking me, why do I call Virginia ground zero for racism? Why do I call Virginia ground zero for racism? It is because of this. Virginia is where Africans became legal slaves for life. It started in Virginia. The plaque reads and cites a law that was enacted in September of 1667. On the question of whether baptism could render slaves free, the Virginia General Assembly decided, quote, "It is enacted and declared by this Grand Assembly and the authority thereof that the conferring of baptism does not alter the condition of the person as to his bondage or freedom." They codified the fact that we don't care if this Negro becomes a Christian. He's still a slave. Now try to explain that to people who keep saying that they wanted slaves to become Christians. No, they did not. As a matter of fact, they knew that if they became Christians, according to the actual text, that they would have been seen as free. So they had to come and make a law to say, it doesn't matter if you're baptized, you're still a slave. Yeah. These quote unquote Bible believing people actually went against scripture to create this law to keep people enslaved. Just want to make that clear. This statute encouraged white enslavers, once they got the law passed, to evangelize their human chattel, since baptized slaves would not be freed. They had to make a legal guarantee first that they would not be freed in order for the slave masters to then teach them 20% of the Bible. Let's be clear on that. And none of the parts that had to do with freedom. In the words of the assembly, masters freed from this doubt may more carefully endeavor the propagation of Christianity by permitting children through slaves, or those of greater growth, if capable, to be admitted to that sacrament. So even after the law, they were still not going back and teaching the older slaves. They were only teaching and indoctrinating the children. The Virginia General Assembly, made up of Anglican men, had been compelled by public pressure to address whether baptism rendered slaves free. It had been a long-standing custom in England that Christians, being spiritual brothers and sisters, could not enslave one another. So they knew what they were doing. It was very deceptively, demonically evil. And we're not going to mince words on that. Yet the economy of the European colonies in North America depended more and more on slave labor. So plantation owners discouraged the enslaved from hearing the Christian gospel, and receiving the sacrament of baptism. They did not want to lose their unpaid labor and diminish their profits. At the same time, missionaries were exerting pressure on the slave owners to evangelize their slaves. So the compromise became, well, let's enact a law so that if we evangelize them, they still cannot be set free. The Virginia Assembly took the initiative to enact a new law. Despite the established tradition, the Assembly decided that baptism would not confer freedom upon their laborers, even though their scriptural text said so. Instead, these Africans would remain in physical bondage even after their conversion. Missionaries, ministers, and slave owners encouraged African Christians in America to be content with their spiritual liberation and to obey their earthly masters. Isn't that a hot mess? I want you to be content just with being liberated in the spirit and keep doing what we say do. Sounds like Christianity today. Black people, just be excited that you're free in Jesus. Don't pay attention to how they're killing and murdering and shooting down Black people, because praise Jesus, you're spiritually free. The Assembly enacted its law concerning enslaved persons and baptism in the 17th century. The law predated the existence of the political entity now known as the United States of America. It was enacted more than 100 years before the Declaration of Independence, and more than 120 years before the Founding Fathers drafted and ratified the Constitution. Looking at the history of colonial Virginia uncovers the reality that racism in the church has been a problem from the very first moments of European contact in North America. So before it was ever a problem with the society at large, it was first a problem with the racist church. Now, who wants to touch that on a Sunday morning? To grasp how American Christians constructed and cooperated with racism, one has to realize that nothing about American racism was inevitable. There was a period from about 1500 to 1700 when race did not predetermine one's station and worth in society. This is not to say that racism did not exist. It surely did. But during the initial stages of European settlement in North America, the colonists had not yet cemented skin color as an essential feature of life in their communities. Race was still being made. It was still a fluid idea. This chapter outlines the early days of European contact with indigenous peoples and the first days of African slavery in North America. It shows how individuals and groups who had the power chose dividends of slavery over dignity and made America a place where darker-skinned people occupied a limited and inferior role in society. Through a series of immoral choices, the foundations were laid for race-based stratification by the Christians. Ding, ding, ding. Yet, if people made deliberate decisions to enact inequality, it is possible that a series of better decisions can begin to change this reality. The question is, do they want it changed? And I'm being real honest with you today. I don't see where they are wanting it to change. Not on a large scale. I don't see it. If you see it, email me and let me know. Send me some articles and let me know where you see American Christians, white European Christians, who are making this super headway at changing the racial dynamics of America. If you have evidence, send it to me. reachshante@gmail.com. I'll be happy to look at it. Facebook Live, I want to thank you for your time and attention. We are now going over to Periscope for our live audience commentary. You can join us at pscp.tv/Life Nation, where we are continuing the conversation. See you there.